So there are two loose heads just floating around in here somewhere?
You can hear them at night. They whisper to each other and then cry.
Since our host isn't here, would anyone care to mix me a drink?
Horror films ask us many questions. Who will survive and what will be left of them? Who's going to believe a talking head? What's blood for if not for shedding? Do you like scary movies? Have you checked The Children? Maybe we'll find the answers together. Thank you for joining us on Photo Flow, Terror in the Smiles. Here are your hosts, Eric Jones and Jake Almond.
Good evening. I'm your host.
This is Jake from Photo Flow. We are excited for the future of this podcast. We've made it through our first year, and right now we're wrapping up our first season. We've already covered many of our favorite horror films, but we always have more. We want your help in making season 2 better than the first. We've recently expanded to YouTube. We found out some people prefer it as a listening platform, and we've already gotten a pretty good response. So we'll be updating that feed every Friday and Sunday. Photo Flow will continue being updated every Wednesday on traditional podcast platforms, probably like the one you're listening to right now. Since you are listening, Eric and I want to take the time to thank you sincerely for supporting Photo Flow. We also want to invite you to join us on Discord. You'll find an easy place to leave us messages and even join us for live shows. We'll post the schedule so you know when to join in. Thank you for listening to Photo Flow.
Terror in the Smiles.
Welcome to Photo Flow. My name is Jake Almond, and this is Eric Jones, and we are recording the day after Thanksgiving, 2022, and I'm still full of food and I had like a little bit of apple cobbler for breakfast, so that's where I'm at. So if I fall asleep on the mic, I'm just going to let Eric roll with it, but I hope everybody had a great holiday, and you will probably hear this the week after, maybe even longer, because I still haven't posted this week's episode from last week. Anyway, I got a lot of stuff to do. So this week we are covering two of my favorites, one of my absolute all-time favorites, and one that I actually didn't watch until, 10, 12 years ago for the first time, so I didn't grow up with it or anything, but one of which I believe was Eric's first time, right?
Yep.
And so I'm going to go ahead and go in order of when they came out. So we're going to start out, let's talk about Phantasm, which is the one that is new to Eric, which came out in 1979, I believe. I didn't have it pulled up. I'm thinking that's right.
Yep, 79.
Yep, and it was directed by Don Coscarelli, who is probably famous from a lot of 80s and 90s kids for the guy who did Beastmaster.
Yeah, that was a surprise when I saw his name come. I was like, oh, it's like Beastmaster. I was like, that was cool.
Yeah, and I think that this movie, this Phantasm, was like the movie that kind of led to his career, because he was fortunate to have parents with money, and they put up the most of the budget for Phantasm, and I think he was able to get some other investors and stuff. But I mean, it does have the feel of an indie film, and at a time when indie films were pretty new. I mean, I think the most successful independent movie for years came out the year before this, and that was the original Halloween. But I feel like this one is even more of an indie film than Halloween is, or it's just a little more put together with just raw creativity and do it like doing a movie with your friends. Whereas I think for all of its indie feel, Halloween had some people behind it that at least kind of had been to film school and kind of knew. And I don't know Don Coscarelli's whole background, but there is a charm to Phantasm. I think the whole franchise really, except for maybe the second one, which feels a little glossier since it's the only studio film in the bunch. But there is a charm to these movies that appeals to me, because they don't. It's just a group of friends coming up with a story kind of on the, as they go on the seat of their pants, and it works for this movie because of its dreamlike nature. To me, all the weirdness of it and almost incoherency at times works to its advantage in a way that it very well could have been a detriment to the film. But so the film starts out this, I guess, beautiful woman, whatever. She's kind of odd. It's kind of scary to me, but she's making love with this man in the graveyard, which is automatically a red flag. Don't ever let a woman seduce you and to make love in a graveyard, unless it's, well, anyway. So then he gets killed because he transforms. You find out it's the tall man, which doesn't even, I think they call him the tall man at some point in the movie, just because they don't have any other way of referring to him. But that sticks, and he is now like, where you have Freddy, Jason, and Michael, you have the tall man. So that's our new boogeyman for this era, or for this series. And he, kills the guy, and then you don't really know why, like what's going on, and then the movie, has that really cool, funeral home, mortuary and everything with the mausoleum, and I really love all those scenes. But it goes, it just really capitalizes on creepiness, and then and the movie for the most part sticks with Mike, the kid, and his older brother Jody, and their friend Reggie, and things kind of lead like. The movie never really takes like on a traditional plot, but it leads through a series of Michael trying to figure out what the weird things he saw at the funeral that day with the tall man and all that means, and then there's a bunch of crazy stuff that happens: flying metal spheres, severed fingers with honey mustard sauce, all kinds of things happen. So you get the sense that there's some type of otherworldly or interdimensional or nightmare type thing going on, and I feel like we're not really going to speak on the sequels too much because Eric hasn't seen them yet, and there's no point, because I think we'll just talk about our interpretation of this first film. But I feel like there is a kind of a clear interpretation of this first movie, but that kind of gets thrown out the window with the sequels. But I'm really interested in hearing what Eric has to say, because this was his first viewing, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Eric.
Yeah, so first I was surprised. I was surprised to have got into this as much as I did. I didn't expect to. It always like like I said, this is my first time actually seeing it. I've known of Phantasm, but like we had been talking beforehand, that what's interesting is that Phantasm is not really a movie, or the series as a whole even. It's not one I hear talked about much in casual discussions with people about horror movies. Usually whenever I hear Phantasm talked about, it's talked about with people who are into horror. So it definitely has a cult status there. And, I was a little wary before starting watching, because kind of having an idea of what it was about, I kind of had an idea that it was one of those movies that can be weird for the sake of being weird. And that's always been something that kind of, it's something that always kind of puts me off. Not necessarily like in it bothers me. It's just something about when a movie seems weird, kind of for the sake of being weird. It's kind of like some of those later moments in Hellraiser that kind of lean towards that. Things like that kind of always kind of push me back a little bit. But I get what you're saying. If they're not part of the fabric of the story that they're telling. Yeah. And so sometimes when stuff gets like that, it kind of puts me off a little, and that's what I kind of thought this would be. And it kind of does have those moments. Earlier, you had mentioned how it sometimes can feel disconnected a little, and it can. But for some reason, I really like that. Because sometimes if a movie is somewhat about this thing, you try to what's another movie kind of about, like Inception or something. A movie like Inception, yeah. You're always trying to, if the story doesn't tell you that we are about to go into a dream, you're trying to look for like the clues or anything that indicate, hey, have we slipped into a dream? Phantasm, I thought, did really well in you'd be watching, and then all of a sudden, then next thing you know, you realize that like Michael is in a dream. You know, he's in a dream, and I was like, wow, that's some really good. That's just really good. Just construction of scenes and everything. And the funny thing is that the more when it plays more abstract, that was when I was really kind of in it because I was trying to make sense out of it. Where it began to kind of waver for me was when we sort of started beginning to get explanations for the thing, like kind of like once you get kind of like the reveal of who the tall man is and what is actually going on, that's when I kind of was like, now, okay. It was kind of cool kind of having this, sort of abstract out of nowhere thing that I was trying to make sense of. And it's not that the story itself doesn't make sense. It's just that I think kind of the fun out of it, the fun was kind of in that portion. And once we begin to get to like, he's from this other dimension or something like that, and turning people into troll zombies or something like that. That's when it was kind of like, that kind of took the phantasm out of Phantasm.
Yeah. Too many explanations for such a strange story that doesn't necessarily need it.
Yeah, and so like the more once they have kind of like the strangeness kind of wore off a little, but I said I enjoyed it, and I just like I said I thought it was really interesting in terms of how like abstract it was, and it feels like even though this was 79, it feels like what was I going to say? It feels like it feels like a little almost like something like actually it feels like a predecessor to Nightmare on Elm Street in a way. It does,
yeah. I feel like Wes Craven saw this movie and it like really lit his imagination up or something, because I feel like after the stark realism and darkness of like Last House on the Left and Hills Have Eyes, almost all Wes Craven's work after that, at some point, even the more straightforward ones, deal in dream logic and reality bleeding into fiction and bleeding into reality and vice versa. And this movie did it, in a very interesting way.
Yeah, and I kind of liked this idea, like kind of like some of the I'm guessing there are some sort of the themes behind the characters. Death is a very prominent thing around it, because like I said, the movie starts with the death of the guy in the graveyard, and he's a friend of of the characters, and not Michael, but Jody, the older brother. He's talking about how he just has trouble with with funerals, and you have a lot of scenes in the graveyard, you have a lot of scenes in the I guess like the mausoleum and all that, and I think it's kind of, you think about, the tall man can be, before actually you get like that explanation, it's almost like, it's like a Grim Reaper type. I thought it was a really good, interesting kind of way. And like I said, I think this is what it was probably trying to express. So like, if anybody out there has any other sort of, theories or explanations on it. But yeah, I just thought it was a really neat, surreal way of kind of tackling death. Kind of a different way than, like, say, when we talked about, Pet Sematary, which was also kind of about the idea of death and mourning and moving on.
Yeah, and to me, the first time I saw it, the first image of Phantasm I had ever seen, there was this DVD that came out, in the early 2000s. It was called Boogeymen, and it was like a compilation DVD celebrating all the greatest boogeymen in horror history. It had like a scene. And it always had like the best scenes from their movie, or what whoever put this together's favorite scenes were of all the boogeymen. So it had Freddy Krueger. It had the first nightmare in Nightmare on Elm Street of Tina. Not the very first one, but the one where he's in the alleyway and he stretches his arms out and he does the famous "This is God" thing with the glove. We'll talk about it in a minute. But it had Friday the 13th. I think it actually used the scene from Jason Goes to Hell at the beginning of Friday the 13th, and it had Chucky. It had like a scene from Child's Play 2 of Chucky when he beats that teacher to death with a ruler. I don't know if you've seen Child's Play 2 yet, but it had Jaws. It didn't have Jaws because they didn't make Jaws a boogeyman. I'm trying to think. It had like all kinds of different horror films, and some of which I had seen, most of which I had seen. But there were some gems on there that I was like, wow. There's one on there that I still want to see that Peter Jackson was involved in. It was like a New Zealand horror film called The Ugly, and I've never found it, and I haven't looked recently to see if it's streaming. But that scene stuck out as like that made me want to see that movie. But it had. Mostly it was all stuff that a lot of us grew up watching, right? But one of the scenes on it, or at least grew up hearing about, and one of the scenes on it was from Phantasm, and it was the scene in the mausoleum where Michael is running from the sphere, and it drills into that guy's head, which is still like a really cool scene. Like, and I think it goes all the way up to the moment where the tall man's chasing him and sticks his hand through the door, and he shuts the door, and the guy and his fingers are like moving, and he cuts his finger off. And then that was the most I had ever seen of it. So I'm thinking the whole movie, in my imagination, I was assuming that the whole movie was this kid trapped in like sort of like the labyrinth, but in a mausoleum. And I thought that is a cool idea for like a fantasy horror film. So when I finally rented it, I had these preconceived notions that this was going to be one of those movies where there's some, like, I really thought it was going to be like weird and layered, like the labyrinth, where he's basically trying to escape this mausoleum and he's being chased by monsters and the tall man and all that. So, which is a cool idea. And I always loved the moments in this creepy funeral home and mausoleum in the series. Like, I think they're some of the best moments. But when I saw it, and it turns out that it's not that type of movie, I didn't really connect with it. And that's my own fault because I went into it with these preconceived notions. And I guess I just didn't really understand it. And I was like, whatever, it's cool. Like, maybe you just had to be there, kind of a thing. Like, maybe if I had seen this back in the early 80s or in the 70s, in 79, I would have understood it more. Or I would have been down with it. But it just wasn't really my cup of tea. So, and I didn't like dismiss it outright or anything, but years later, I thought I should give this another chance. So I watched it and really, really found myself liking it a lot more. And I don't know what the explanation for that is, but it was a much better quality copy. Maybe I was just older and that made a difference. And it doesn't always make a difference, obviously, but just maybe my own experiences, I was able to connect kind of what I think the movie was about, and I don't know for sure what Coscarelli would say it's about, but what I think it's about is Michael's, like, if you don't consider any of the other sequels and just make this a standalone film, what I think it's about is that what's really happening in reality is that Michael is dead. Not Michael, but his brother Jody is dead. Reggie is like his big brother's best friend, and so of course they're close enough in age that he's going to look up to his big brother. He's going to look up to his big brother's best friend, and his mom and dad are gone or dead or whatever, and his big brother now, who is like the most important person in his life, is now dead. So he's mourning his big brother, and maybe he's creeped out by this funeral home. And he's having these stress, grief nightmares, trying to work through his feelings and his grief about his big brother, and that's where the most of the weird shit happens, is in his nightmares. And even at the end, when they do that thing that Carrie popularized with the fake out ending, or the jump scare ending with him coming through the mirror, the way Carrie's mom's hand comes to the grave, like that just became the way you had to end horror movies there for a little while after Carrie. And so like Nightmare on Elm Street does it too later on. I don't think that that's necessarily leading into it. Does ultimately, because they made a Phantasm too, but I don't think that's necessarily taking away from what this first movie was trying to be. And if I watch it like that, I'm like, that's pretty cool. I mean, I'm not saying that it goes super deep on the subject or anything like that, but I like the idea of it just being this kid's stress dreams, or this kid's grief, or whatever, kind of manifesting in his nightmares. And we do as human beings, we do sometimes work things out in our subconscious. You know, like if I'm really stressed out, one of the most important things I can do for myself is get a good night's sleep. And sometimes you do have stress dreams, or I don't have as many as like Heather. My wife has really vivid stress dreams when she's stressed out. But that is a way that you work through that sometimes. And, or at least, I mean, I don't know. I think that dreams are important in that way for a lot of people. They don't necessarily teach you anything or whatever, but they can help. Like, it's amazing how you can conquer some things with a couple nights of sleep and thought. When you actually put thought into it and try to choose your battles and pick your words carefully, you can really learn. You can, like, it's so much better than acting on impulse, you know, when you're upset about something. So I feel like that's what the movie's trying to do. But I have other explanations for what's going on, because you have to if you want to consider it as a whole franchise. But just looking at it as one movie, that's what I would consider it to be about. And then it kind of opens it up to just kind of do and go crazy and do whatever you want to do, you know? So I think Elm Street does something similar. At least the first two films in that franchise do something kind of similar, which opens the door for you to just kind of have fun with a good horror film, and not put too much stock into how the plot plays out. And it lets you be a little sloppy maybe with the continuity, because hell, if you're dealing with nightmares and dreams, those don't play by the rules a lot of times. So I don't really, there are moments of this movie that I'm like, wait a second, what? Like when Reggie gets stabbed, and it seems like he dies, but then he's in the final scene. So that, I mean, that's kind of like, obviously I had to be part of a dream or whatever, like, or whatever, you know, it doesn't, those things work for me because of that dream logic. But in another movie, I'd be like, wait a second, did they forget that they killed off the character like 15 minutes ago? What happened? For some reason, it worked here for me. But maybe those, like you were talking about how sometimes that takes you out of the movie. I think the first time I saw this movie, it kind of did. So when I was kind of interested to see how it played for you. But that's cool. I mean, you picked up on that. But I do think, you know, watching this now is different than me, at least me personally, watching it when I was 20 whatever years old I was when I watched it, when I finally sat down and watched the whole thing. And like I said, preconceived notions are a thing. I try not to go into a movie thinking I kind of know what I'm trying to get out of it. I let the story play out and the storytellers do their thing. But with this one, I had an idea of what I thought I was watching and what I was excited to watch, and it wasn't what I went into it thinking it was going to be. So now, The Tall Man, for me, I don't know how the funeral home was for you as a kid, but here I went to a lot of funerals. Every old person that died, and unfortunately a few young people that died growing up in the church that my parents went to, we went to those stuffy old funeral parlors, those Southern, maybe it's not just Southern, I don't know, but those, but and I mean, you know, I'm a short person anyway, but when I was a kid, all the undertakers, what do you call them? Not pallbearers. What do you call the guys who run the funeral home?
The mortician.
The morticians and their helpers and the people that run the funeral home, right? It's usually like in our hometown, it's usually like a whole family, like it's a family business, and they all stand there. There was like so many people I knew. There's Hartsel Funeral Home around here, and they have 2 locations, and it's this one family, and I've met the kids of the guy who started it and everything, and really nice guys, really nice family. Make a lot of money off people's death, though. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. You got to have them, but there's a certain level of creepiness to it. So, as a kid walking into these places, this was how I saw those guys. Really stoic, standing there in the suits. They seemed really tall and really kind of scary in a way, like the tall man. Like, that's that image in this movie. It captures that vibe that I got off of going to the funeral home when I was a kid. And so it's instantly relatable in that way, in a really creepy way. And I just couldn't imagine getting stuck in one of those places, like getting trapped in there, and like I would be so creeped out. And I'm not really generally creeped out around death. I just never have felt comfortable around funeral tradition. Like I always hated it when I had to be in the family line, and I don't know how you guys do it out your way. I don't know if it's regional or if it's normal for everywhere, but like how they do it around here is the whole family stands there in like in a lineup almost, and people come through and view the body, and like what they would call receiving friends and family. They come through, review, like actually look at the body and come through and shake everybody's hand, and you just got to stand there for however long the people have lined up all the way outside the building, depending on the person that's dead. And dude, that is uncomfortable. Like, that is the most miserable experience as a family member. And I was like, I'll never do this crap when I get older. I'll never do.
No, we've had it too. Now, a couple of ones I've had to go to recently have not. But yeah, it is. It's kind of the same way. Growing up, I never really had. I think the first funeral I ever went to was my my father's stepfather, and I was like 11 or 12. So I it was a little later, than most. I guess some will be at a funeral at much younger than that, but I was close to like 13 or something when I went to the first funeral I ever attended. I never had so much an issue with the the funeral home per se. For me, it's always, I know for myself, when it comes to the like when someone passes, for me personally, like I have my moments, like at that moment, when you get the news or whatever, and I kind of work my way through it. For me, I try to keep my thing as close to normal as possible. What always made me uncomfortable is the funeral itself, because it's always like, all right, I put a bandage on this thing, and now today's the funeral. I have to rip it off again, and it's like I kind of just started to get my mind right back mentally, and I kind of have to revisit it again. So yeah, that was always kind of my thing. Earlier this summer, my aunt had passed, my mother's younger sister, and so that was one that hit everybody hard and suddenly, and it was kind of like the same thing. It hurt then, and then it was like I was kind of like on my path to going on, and then it's like the funeral, and we kind of had that moment there, like you were saying. It was kind of that, and it's like I get it, like it's not, there's nothing malicious about it, but it is just very like, I understand why people are doing it, and I'm never mad about it or anything, but it's like, yeah, it's upsetting, because you kind of just want to be with, you want to be with your family, or just be with your thoughts at it. So yeah, this movie definitely can definitely have a whole lot of interpretation on those matters. Especially, like you said, depending on how one has had to deal with it themselves.
Well, because the tall man to me is just this representation of funeral practices and all the superficial, and I don't mean superficial for like what they do, what these people like that actually do that kind of work do. I mean like the theatrical presentation side of it, like the embalming of the body and the makeup and so I take it like the yellow goo when he gets his fingers cut off is the embalming fluid. I feel like that, whether embalming fluid even looks like, I don't really know what embalming fluid looks like, but I'm just saying that's what it evokes to me, is some type of chemical. It's not blood, it's like something else. He's almost made up, very pale, like you sometimes see a corpse doesn't quite look right. Like even if they do a good job and you're like, well, like they did a good job, but it's still just not like that person, especially if you really know that person well. It's just like, it's still not quite, it's just not that person anymore. It's just a shell. Like what made that person alive is gone, and no matter how you make it up, it's not, them anymore. And because what you really connect with people is so much more than just that outer shell, And it's just, I feel like whether intentional or not, just because of the imagery that Coscarelli captured here, it really worked to like personify that uncomfortable, that uncomfortable aspect of funeral ritual, and I thought that aspect of it was really cool as making it like spooky and scary, and he doesn't lean too hard in it to the point where it's on the nose. It's there if you're looking for it, or if you're me and you just kind of. And that's what it ends up representing to you. I don't know. In that way, it's very unique, and I like this movie for that reason, because I'm like, I don't know of another film that uses these settings and those ideas, and that's pretty cool. All the like slave dwarves in on Mars or in hell or in some other dimension of plane of existence, that aspect of the story is kind of like whatever, but the other stuff is what I come for. And I think he does a good job with all that. So it's enough that, and to me, Reggie Bannister, especially in the sequels, is a really, like, in this movie the acting is kind of like hit and miss. It is what it is. It's an indie film. None of these people were professional actors. Reggie Bannister was a Vietnam vet, friend of Don Coscarelli, and that was pretty much all he was at that time. And then he became, as the series progresses, he's sort of this cult, almost like Ash from Evil Dead. He becomes like the hero of the whole thing, but he's like a mix between Ash, which Ash was kind of bumbling too, but he's like a mix between Ash and like Kurt Russell in Big Trouble in Little China for me, as being kind of an accidental hero, and he gets sidekicks and people that help him in each movie, but he's a really fun character. I really like him a lot as the series goes on, but in this movie he really doesn't have a whole lot to do. He's more reactive to like what the hell's going on, kind of thing. But they give him like a lot of humanity at the end. He cares for Mike. It's a little strange at the end. Let's have a fireside chat, and hey man, let's just go on the road, man. Like, what, doesn't this kid have school? Like, what's going on? But yeah, I mean, I really like Reggie and Reggie the Ice Cream Man. I mean, they do some really cool stuff with his character in the sequels that makes him like really awesome. So it is worth continuing on in the Phantasm franchise. But yeah, I mean, I think it captures those feelings for me, and I don't have anything, and I don't want anybody, which out of the 7 people that'll listen to this episode, I don't want any of you guys to assume that I'm like against people that practice the funeral arts, but there's a certain creepiness to it, and even though I've met and talked quite a bit with the people that do it around here at Stanley Funeral Home and Hartsel Funeral Home, I've met the people and talked to them quite a bit actually about what they do. I could never do it. But the old men, when I was a kid, man, looking up at them, they were all like this Angus Scrimm looking tall men type, like just real scary to me as a child. So I didn't get scared at the funeral so much, but like something about them standing there and greeting us as we walked through the funeral home door, it was just always.
Yeah, see, that's something that's something that's so interesting about like funeral homes. Whenever I go to one, like at the for example, the church that me and my mom go to, the church has a partnership with a specific funeral home, and it's family owned, pretty much like you said, like most of them are. But like if I had to go to other funeral homes for other funerals, it's so weird. You never run across, like, it doesn't matter, you know, how old you are, whoever runs the funeral home is always old. You never run across, like, you know, like if you went to a funeral home for a funeral in your 20s, you never ran across like someone who was like in their 30s that ran the funeral home. They're always much older. I don't know how that always ends up happening.
It's like they don't get to become. I mean, they might have younger people that work for them.
Yeah.
If you go plan the funeral, like I've only been part of one. Heather's dad's funeral. That's the only funeral I've ever been a part of from the actual planning stages. And then you meet people that you don't meet the night of the funeral, like the people who take you and let you pick out the casket and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it is weird that's like you're not allowed to be in that part of the business until you reach 70 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's great. Once again, no shots fired at the, you know, I'm probably going to be cremated, so I don't care. I should be able to say whatever I want. You could just burn me. But, yeah, all of that experience going to funerals as a kid, like, I prefer a much quieter wake. If somebody wants to sing a song, wonderful. If somebody wants to play a song, wonderful. If somebody wants to say something about the deceased, wonderful. But we don't need this whole, like, everybody go look at the body kind of a thing. Nah, I mean, maybe somebody out there needs that, but I don't personally need that. For my own mourning, I don't have to see it. But it doesn't, like, disturb me. I just don't. Dude, the weirdest thing I've seen, and I'm sorry if I'm calling anyone out, anybody can grieve, in my opinion, any way they want to, but I've seen people take pictures of the dead body in the casket.
Yeah, I've seen that.
My grandfather did that with my grandma, man, and I was like, really? So, like, for years before he passed away, there's a picture of my grandma, and in the corner is just like a fucking Walmart. Somebody at Walmart had to develop this shit, too. Like, 35 millimeter regular picture, like you'd see in a photo album, just sitting in the corner of the frame of my grandmother's dead body. I'm like,
damn.
Grandpa, I'm not liking this very much.
Like, I could almost see Coscarelli while making this, and he's just like, hey, I got this idea, but at some point, I got to give the audience something, and that's when it kind of gets to that. And, you know, it's like it's, like you said, it's kind of whatever, but everything else is the meat, and it's really dreamlike. It's really unsettling. Like I said, I like the fact that you'll just be watching, and it just seems like out of nowhere you're automatic. Like, it's like, oh darn, we were in a dream sequence, but you don't really know, because it really kind of plays like how sometimes a dream may happen. Like, you may be sitting up in your bed watching TV or something, and then next thing you know, you're like, I don't know, you're riding a bike or something, and then you ride it off the cliff, and then you wake up, and it's like, but that's how dreaming can be. And I thought it was, I thought that's a really good. I thought it was just really good in how he wrote that and constructed things. I know he did all the editing and all that himself. So kudos on all that.
Yeah, it really did work in that way. Because there's a scene where he shows Jody the box with the severed finger, and they're talking on the front porch or the front stoop or whatever, and he's like looking in the box, and there's the finger, and then it cuts to them in the kitchen, and they're continuing the conversation. Now, I mean, other movies do that, and it doesn't bother me, because sometimes people do walk to another place and continue talking. But in that way, it was very much like a dream, because in a dream, when you think back, if it's vivid enough for you to remember the next day, sometimes the settings just change, and in the dream you don't even notice it. Like, it seems like it's natural, but then when you think back, it's like, that was really weird. For 1 second I was dreaming we were in the kitchen, and the next second we were at so and so's house. They do stuff like that a few times, and I really like that, because that is very much like how a dream works. Gotta say, this movie got an X rating when it came out, and I don't know why, but I know there was a lot of I don't know why. There's a lot of footage in it that was cut, but I've seen a lot of that footage. I know they repurposed like 40 minutes or something from it in Phantasm 4, which is, they actually repurposed that footage really in a cool way that they shot back for this movie. And the goriest thing in the film that sticks out to most people is the drill to the head and the thing squirting the blood and the guy falling and then pissing himself, which is a great moment.
You know what? You know what's so funny? I just thought that was a funny touch, because that's one of those things that, like, they always tell you. Like, you'll hear it in a TV show or something, like South Park, and it's used for, like, gore, just like toilet humor, literally toilet humor or something. But when he died, and then you just see, I was like, wow, he actually used the fact
realistic. You do void your bowels and bladder when you die.
I was like, I was like, I don't know why. I just thought that was so. I was like, that's a really nice touch, because people always say it, but no one ever depicted it.
Yeah, I thought that was cool and creepy and disturbing too. What's funny is that guy who plays that part, Kenneth Jones. If you look him up on IMDb, the picture that he uses is of the thing drilling into his head. Like, that's his IMDb photo.
Oh, you know what's funny? Also, I thought that little sphere thing kind of reminded me of Predator a little, because you could see when it was hunting in red, and I was like, yeah, that reminds me of Predator.
Yeah, and maybe they were inspired by that. Who knows? Because that sphere is the most famous image from Phantasm. I mean, you see them in the sequels a lot too, but that became like the icon. As much as the tall man, I think that became the icon of the franchise. But yeah, I mean, there's some really cool moments, but like, to get an X rating, I just don't see it. Like, I don't understand it, because it wasn't doing anything crazier than what we've seen in other movies up to that point. To me, it's not even that gory, so to speak. That scene with the sphere is probably the goriest thing in it. Even when Reggie gets stabbed, it's very, like, you'd see that much blood in a 1950s Western, like, I don't know. It's just kind of weird that it got picked on, and I don't know if that was part of the whole MPAA trying to crack down on, but this was even before the slasher craze was really, there. And I mean, the nudity is very, very tasteful. It's not like overly done either. So, I don't know. I don't know why I got an X rating. I really couldn't answer. I'll never ever figure out why the MPAA does things that they do. But
no.
I'm not sure what they had to cut out to get it to an R rating. But I know, like, I don't know if there was like a particular scene they had to cut down or what, but I know that a lot of the footage that they cut out is repurposed later on. Overall, I mean, there really isn't, like, I think you did say something similar, made me think of, so Coscarelli had made a movie before this, and it really didn't get that great of reception, but there was one scene in that movie that was like a jump scare, and it made the audience jump, and that's what made him want to make a horror film, because it actually got a reaction from the theatrical audience. So that's what kind of led him to do this. And his mother apparently was a novelist, so she helped him. I don't know how much she helped with the story, but she helped him come up with like a title, because this movie had like a bunch of different titles, and he settled on Phantasm because it was a word that Edgar Allan Poe used to use a lot in some of his stories. So that's where the name Phantasm comes from. But I think it fits the movie too. If you look up the definition of Phantasm, I think it fits what they're going for in the film. So the most successful thing about this movie to me is like you were talking about, is what it does that other movies don't do necessarily as well when they're just trying to make a weird movie, is that it kind of tells you up front by the title what you're getting into, and then everything that happens is working towards some sort of theme and story. Is non-traditional though it may be, it all works together to form a full movie, and I think it nails that. Like, it's just up to you whether you connect with it or not. But I think it works. I've actually watched it 4 times now, so that's pretty good for a movie that the first time I watched it, I didn't really, get into it.
I wasn't expecting to get into this, and I like what it does. Like I said, when it's being weird, because even though, like I said, it's funny, I said earlier that I'm not a fan of weird for weird's sake, but when it's weird and off-putting like that, I was into it. And they said when it tries to become more of a standard movie, that's when I kind of drift off for a minute. But maybe one day I'll check out the sequels. But like I said, I think this really does work standalone.
Here are some exciting coming attractions from Photo Flow.
The kids of Elm Street don't know it yet, but something is coming to get them.
There's something out there, isn't there?
We just see cuts happen.
What did that, Lieutenant?
I don't know.
Tina! What's the coroner got to say? He's in the jail and puking since he saw it.
They're gonna kill me for sure.
Did you do it?
There was somebody else there.
He was locked in a room with a girl who went in alive and came out in a rubber bag.
No one knows where it came from or who it will visit next.
Nancy? There's something wrong with you. You're imagining things.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Do you believe in the boogeyman?
No.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
No!
She's the only one who can stop it. If she fails,
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
no one will survive. From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Podcasts ask us many questions. Who will listen and who will return next week? Who will take the time to rate and review? Check for a new episode of Photo Flow every week. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Photo Flow Terror and Instagram on Photo Flow_Terror. Thank you for listening to Photo Flow. We'll find the terror in the smiles.